Okay, we'll get started. I imagine some people will start joining still over the next few minutes. But hi, everybody. Hope you're enjoying day 2 of the Food Power Festival. I'm Simon Shaw, and I program manage Food Power, working with Cecily and Ben. Um, um, I do also have a particular interest in Meals on Wheels for older people. With our colleague Morven, I co-founded our Older People's Food campaign at Sustain, and back in 2019, I was lucky enough to be able to travel to France, Italy, and South Korea, exploring their approaches to older people's access to food, and particularly Meals on Wheels delivery. So I'll share some links to that, but I didn't want to talk about that today because I wanted to make sure that we heard from our 3 speakers. And just to provide a bit of context that I'm sure many of you will be aware of in relation to Meals on Wheels for older and disabled people, we have seen declining statutory support for those services over a number of years now, but there are also services that have managed to adapt to that new sort of funding environment and are still managing to reach hundreds, if not thousands of people in some cases. And I think we saw before the pandemic, lots of projects were trying to, there were lots of meals being offered in local areas, but some were offering some level of takeaway or delivery option. But then during the pandemic, we've obviously seen community meals delivery really come back on the table. Existing Meals on Wheels or other sort of community services expanded, but lots of new ones popped up very quickly, really, during the first national lockdown, and many of those are continuing in some way, although many are having to explore how they do maintain any service if they want to do so for the longer term. And we've also seen, alongside hot and cold meals, sort of meal kits, affordable meal kits being made available. And Food Newcastle were one of the other speakers I would have liked to have come today, but actually I was very foolish. I scheduled today's event on Tuesday, which is the day that they deliver all their meal kits around Newcastle. So there was just no way that they were going to be able to come and join us today. But we will share some information that they've shared with us about their meal kit program afterwards. Um, and meals have been provided for free at lower cost, pay it forward, sometimes full cost to people. Sometimes I've heard of cases of older people perhaps paying for the full price because they can afford to do so, but knowing that that's actually going to subsidize a free meal for a lower income family who's struggling in their area, and that can actually break down the stigma around meals. So there are all these different models around the country, and we thought now is a great time for us to come together and take stock of what's been happening during the pandemic, but also pre-pandemic as well. So we've got 3 speakers that I've asked to speak for, I think it was 9 minutes exactly, or 8 minutes, I think, wasn't it, to try and make sure that we get through the presentations and have some time for questions from attendees, but also a bit of time towards the end for you all to share your own experiences and advice as well as some challenges. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jade Bashford, who's the Programme Manager for Ready Steady Eat, the Ready Steady Eat project based at the Real Farming Trust. So go for it, Jade.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jade Bashford from the Real Farming Trust, and I work on a partnership program called Ready Healthy Eat. And the purpose of it is to do ready meals really well. There are 4 delivery partners who are separate to each other and are each brilliant at what they do. And they're quite different to each other. So there's now a group in Belfast whose client group are adults with learning difficulties and autism. There's Simonines in Edinburgh, whose client group is mainly homeless people. There's Brighton and Hove Food Partnership, and there's the Hornbeam in London. So they get on and deliver ready meals, and this piece of work was planned before COVID and will continue for the next 2 years as well. It's already 1 year in. The 5th partner is Coventry University, and they evaluate social impact of the work of the partners. And one thing we want to do is draw out the learning from the work that's happening on the ground and share it. So it's really nice to be here, but also, of course, to hear what's going on that other people are doing well and take it back into the project. So very grateful to Simon that we can all have this space together. So I was trying to think about what would be most useful to share today, and I felt like a kid in a sweetie shop. I didn't know where to begin. There were so many good things that people have tried in the 4 projects. I put some things in the chat. Actually, I'll put it again because some people came late. I'll just stick it in there now. So I've put some links that I'll refer to as I chat. The first thing's a newsletter. So it's free and occasional, and we put in good practice to share from our projects and from other ones as well. So you can sign up for that if you have the link out of the chat there. So I've just picked out 3 or 4 good ideas, things that have worked. The first thing to say is that it's worked for us to measure social impact. That there are lots of projects talking about confidence or changing diet or improving mental health and so on. You don't actually know what effect you're having unless you measure it. And it's not that hard to do. Coventry University have helped us. They've made a toolkit to do that, to measure social impact, so that you can see the impact you're having on your community or people's relationships or people's sense of well-being. I've stuck it in the chat. It's academically rigorous, but it's aimed at community groups and it's really easy to use. It's actually quite fun. It's quite nicely presented. So we found some surprises actually when we started measuring social impact, and that enabled us to change our practice to have more of the impact we wanted to have, and to notice the surprise impacts that we'd had in some cases. We've done a lot of thinking about nutrition. Of course, when we were thinking about what good ready meals are, the first task was to define what a good ready meals service is. And obviously nutrition was near the top of the list of that. Some of our meals weren't as good as we thought they were when we came to actually look at them. Probably like some of you, a lot of the food was arriving, it's rescued food oftentimes from fair share or locally gathered. So there weren't standard recipes. The meals were being devised there and then in the morning on the spot. So at first we thought it might be quite hard to deal with measuring nutrition of the meals and making sure it remained good. But we found a nifty little gadget, and it's not the only one, it's an example one that is very easy to use. So if you've got volunteer cooks, it's easy enough to have in the kitchen for anyone to use, and you can just type in what you're planning to use from what's turned up in the morning, and then if you find it's got too much salt or this, that, the other, you can quickly adjust it and run it again and check you're getting things about right for people, and it'll print out a label. So I've stuck that in the chat, and we recommend to you to do your best with really making sure you're not putting out too many calories or too much salt or whatever it is. So that's the second point, measure nutritional content if you can. The third point is to be really aware of the impact you're having from your food purchasing. That it's easy to pop around the corner and to buy something cheap from the supermarket if you're short of something. But what you don't want to be doing, of course, is causing the very problems that you're trying to address just somewhere else. So think about what effect you're having all along the supply chain when you buy food. And if you possibly can, find ways to link up with agroecological or local farmers. It seems pretty tricky at first because it might be more expensive ingredients, but there are some people doing a good job of it. You might look on the Open Food Network website, which I put in the chat. And there are examples there of farmers or producers who have got mainly fairly comfortably off consumers who are trying to do the right thing. And there's quite a few good examples of where they've got their consumers to buy an extra one. So they buy one for themselves, a veg box, whatever it is, and then they buy another one for someone that needs. So it's good for the producer because they're selling more stuff. That's what they want to do. It's good for you because you can access some really good quality food for your project. So yeah, that was the next point. Really think about the effect you're having when you choose what you buy, and try and partner organisations that are addressing that. And the final thing I wanted to say was to take every opportunity to engage with your diners. It's an obvious point, and probably most of you are doing it already, but we found when we did the social impact measurement work, sometimes even really small things were making a massive difference. Were quite unglamorous things, like if your people are queuing for the food, see if you can make the queue wiggly so they can chat to each other. Or when we were surprised to find that the volunteer drivers were really getting a lot out of what they were doing. We thought they were just dropping off food, and that's what they were for. But no, actually the chat that came with the food was nearly as important as the food itself. So just, having discovered that, then we could change the delivery run so that the volunteer drivers had fewer people to visit and then running more time to chat. So it's an obvious point really, but take every opportunity to engage with people and understand their whole context. You know, you've decided you've got too many calories, you reduce the calories in a meal, but actually the food's going out to people who are elderly and underweight. So take every opportunity to understand the context and engage the people that you're working alongside and to bring them in. That's it. That's all I want to say. I'm on time.
Thanks
Thanks,
very
everyone.
much. Thanks, Jade. And yeah, really important point there that quite a few of us in the sector talk about more than meals, taking a more than meals approach, and that top quality time that a volunteer driver will have with a recipient of a meal can be really powerful, and I think is undervalued probably by commissioners and others sometimes. So we're going to move to Peter now, Peter Clark, who's the Managing Director at Dartmoor Community Kitchen Hub. Peter's camera unfortunately isn't working today, but the audio should be fine. And I'm going to be running some slides for him as well. So I'll open those now. So go ahead, Peter.
Hello, everybody. And again, apologise for my camera not working. Just thought I'd start off, I'll give you a little bit of background history to Dartmoor Community Kitchen and myself. So I've practically worked in charity world for about 30 years, mostly with youth charities, but in 2012 I took a sabbatical and went to cook in a nursing home because I have a passion for cooking, and I was quite surprised at the quality of food there, but also how important it was to the older generation. After that, I met up with a lady called Stella West Harling, who owns the Ashburton Cookery School, quite an internationally renowned cookery school, and she has a passion. And her passion was that every older person should have access to nutritional food at affordable prices. And on the back of that, Dartmoor Community Kitchen Hub was born. If you could change the slide, please. Now, Dartmoor Community Kitchen is a very small not-for-profit organisation based down here in Devon, and we operate under 4 key principles. The first being partnership. So everything we want to do is in partnership, whether it's in partnership with a beneficiary or with providers, etc. The second principle is it's about local, and it's local people. We want to train local people to produce meals using local produce for local people. So it's about a circular community. And to deliver this, we developed a series of pilots. So we tried out our thinking and our way of working in different ways. The first way, we worked with a care home. So we cooked all the meals in the care home, but also ran a hot meal program into the community from the care home. We then looked at a second pilot, which was about running a ready meal program, so a frozen ready meal program and a hot meal program, and both doing it together. And our latest pilot is we opened up a cafe and worked with a commercial partner. So we had a cafe environment where we also produced meals for the community. Now, for us, what was really important was not just knowing that we were doing this, but understanding what we were producing, and as Jay quite rightly pointed to, made a difference to somebody. It made a kind of difference. What we were doing was good. So in 2018, we undertook a research project with the medical sciences team at Exeter University, where we fed 21 people for 21 days. And the Exeter University guys measured the impact of it, both physical and mental impact of it. And we were astounded. The results are now published, and have been published for a while. We were astounded at the difference it makes. And just to give you one example, in our program, there were 9 people at risk of malnutrition. And after just a short intervention of 3 weeks, 6 were deemed no longer at risk. So it has a massive, massive impact. This year, COVID struck, and then we had to close the cafe, but we turned it into a food bank as well. But we also in October got some money from the lottery. I managed to get about £77,000 from National Lottery to run a hot meal program to support the nutritional needs of the elderly in our communities over the winter period, which was a major, major success. And I'll go on to that in a little bit more later. And then finally, where we're going to next is in autumn this year. We're extending into a new research project with Exeter University, the NHS, several GPs, Plymouth University. And this is really about much more year-long study of the impact that food has, not just on someone's physical health, but also their mental health, and setting up a set of nutritional standards that we need to apply when we're feeding our older generation. So if you could change the slide, please, Simon. Yes. So as we said, nutrition is key, and for us it was really important to make sure what we were doing was good and it had a great nutritional benefit. And then we understood and we always believed that what we put in our tank, the fuel we put in our tank, fires the engine, but food was much more than that. For us, the way that we develop our pilots is about community. And what we found very quickly was that every community is different. There's different cultures, etc., and different ways of doing things. So we needed to develop models that were diverse enough to be fit into any community, that any community could buy into. If you could please change the slide. One of the biggest discoveries I think we made, and this particularly came to light during our lottery funded project, was that communities working together on a project brought so many more benefits than just that was received by the beneficiaries. We supported local businesses, so when we buy our food locally, it helps them. We support local employment, and it gave the community an opportunity to have a sense of ownership of it. And this really came to the fore in our lottery project, where we, as I said, received £77,000 to deliver these meals, but we turned it into the community type project. And we attracted in a very short space of time over 70 volunteers that really wanted, and we were quite stunned, wanted to get involved in supporting their community. And now that has led us into a new way of thinking, that we're now going to take the Dartmoor Community Kitchen Hub, which is a small not-for-profit, and turn it into a community benefit society. So the community can own the project and deliver the project from table to fork, or fork to table, which way, I'm not sure which way it goes, from ground to fork or whatever it is now. And we find that there's a huge amount of interest from our community. One of the other key things, if we can change this one more time, please, we found is that the awareness of what was actually happening in the community was was virtually non-existent. Hardly anybody that volunteered for our program understood what was actually happening. They all thought that an older person was this stereotypical grandmother sitting in a rocking chair. They did not see the need of this in the community. We worked with partnerships, adult health and social services, and they were desperate for this sort of program. But one of the biggest things that came out of this program was that the need for a short intervention was much greater than a long meal program. So what they were, the biggest 98% of the people that took up on the meals were those that had recent illness or injury, etc. And this was a lifeline for them. And what we did with that is that we collected all the evidence, not just from the partners, but the beneficiaries and the volunteers, and we fed that back into the lottery, and we share our information. One more time, please. I spent some time thinking when Simon asked me to do this talk about what the future of Meals on Wheels were. And I think the future of Meals on Wheels is very vague. I think it's one of those things that a lot of our beneficiaries perhaps did when they were younger, and they see it as a charitable thing. We certainly came across quite a bit of resistance amongst that. There's no budgets for it. There's no funding. Nobody wants to fund this sort of project. So it really has to be self-sustaining. I've looked at every sort of funder, and it's a really difficult ask. The only way you can do it, I think, is to do it as an enablement project and get the hook in there. Once councils and communities and funders see the true benefit that hot meal program or a meal program brings to the older people, once they can measure that, once they can see that in pounds, as we would have said, pounds, shilling and pence, they then start to stand up and look at it. And this is what we have achieved with our lottery project, and this is what we are doing with our research project going forward, to prove to government, and we're part of Feeding Britain, to prove to councils, to prove to the NHS that this has a real benefit for them, far beyond just what the recipients are having, which is a meal. Then the last couple of quick things I was asked, there was two questions and I've just lost my answers to them. What would I see? One piece of advice, my piece of advice, if you really want to make a project work, you've got to understand that to make it financially sustainable is a tough ask in this current climate, and it's not going to get any better. Funding is scarce, and if you find it, grab it with both hands. So I would suggest that you work very closely with your community and get your community totally involved in your project. When they understand it, when they see the need, they'll buy into it and they'll love it. And that is my big piece of advice for sustainability. Thank you. I think I'm early.
Thanks, Peter. That's great. It's really great to hear about the links that you've made, in particular with universities and researchers, and that really powerful point around community ownership and lack of community awareness before that, about what was needed and what was available perhaps in the area as well. So thanks. I'd just like to go on to Livia now. So Livia is the health lead at Greenwich Cooperative Development Agency in Southeast London, and she's been involved in their Cook and Freeze program.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Peter. I'm just going to share my screen because I have a little presentation. Okay, so I just have to find it. Oh dear. I'm not sure. Sorry about this. I'm not sure why I can't share it. Beg your pardon. Have you got it there, Simon?
Take your time. Have you got it open on your?
Yeah, I'm just trying. I have got it open, but I can't seem to. Oh, hang on. Show all windows. Here we go.
Thanks.
Okay, can you see that? Can everyone see that?
Perfect.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so thank you, Simon. So, my name is Livia. I work for Greenwich Cooperative Development Agency, and this agency has been working since 1982, supporting communities to thrive, and they do this through enterprise, through training, through health projects, and through hub work. So I'm here to talk about, yes, as Simon says, the Cook and Freeze project, which we have been running across 2 boroughs in London, the boroughs of Lewisham and the boroughs of Greenwich. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background. Okay, so this was pre-pandemic, and actually I've noticed that my colleague, who we do work very closely with on this program, is also here from Public Health Greenwich, Nicola. And in pre-pandemic, this community meal program was set up. It was where we got a group of volunteers from the community, people wanting to come together, and they actually came up with this particular idea, and it was to run monthly pop-up kitchens where they were preparing meals for the wider community using surplus food. So this had been running quite very successfully pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic came, and of course this had to stop. And where we had been, already working in food and running this program, we were able to respond to the food emergency need through changing the community meals into a frozen meal project. So from March 2020, we were preparing food that was distributed to those who were shielded and vulnerable. Then when that came to an end in September 2020, we managed to get some funding through the Food Power Grant, and we set up and started to deliver a Cook and Freeze project, which it was continuing with the frozen meals, which had gone down very well during the pandemic, and we continued to prepare these cook and freeze frozen meals that were being delivered through our community groups and projects that were working with families, children, and those who were vulnerable. So this project was run. We have a chef. We had volunteer chefs. We had some staff involved. We were working also with public health. We were working with a church in Lewisham, and we had lots of volunteers who were involved in this program. In fact, the Cook and Freeze project, I would say, actually has been successfully run by mostly volunteers. So we were using mainly surplus, and it was topped up by cupboard store ingredients. So as I said, we were providing these meals for families and their children, and for people who were food insecure. And across both boroughs, we worked with a number of different groups, food projects, organisations, 13 or plus more, And every single week we were producing over 600 frozen meals. So we would work, this project would run 1 day per week, and we would have shifts where we had volunteers coming in, supporting the chefs with prepping all the food, cutting up the vegetables, and then we would have a shift in the afternoon where they would be then packing and labeling up all the meals, which would then be frozen, and then later that week would be then distributed out to the families through the community food projects. So the output, and this is from March to April this year, is about 38,000 meals that we distributed. So a lot of the work, obviously, yes, we had people coming in, working in COVID safe way. So we had a small number of volunteers, and they took turns in coming in. So although we had lots of volunteers, we had a rota shift, and they would come in. But we had, our communication was always done through WhatsApp groups, or and we also then consulted with the groups that were picking up the meals to find out, whether it was appropriate. We were getting feedback from the families, finding out which of the meals they preferred or what they wanted. We used Google Forms and telephone surveys. So this is an example of some of the meals that we got feedback from that they liked or they wanted. So in Greenwich, we were using mainly surplus and topping it up with some, buying some additional ingredients so that we could make a balanced meals. And our chefs were actually, working out what to cook as the surplus came in weekly. And so you had a lot of variety in different types of meals, but we were also responding to what we were being told that people liked. In Lewisham, it was a little bit more structured, where we knew what we would be making, and so we were buying in some of the ingredients so we could make things. But again, it was based on what people telling us that they wanted. So as you can see, very popular was the vegetable curries, the jollof rice, cottage pie, especially for the younger children, and the macaroni cheese. So, I mean, we also had, as I said, volunteers. We had so many different volunteers, and it's working together with the volunteers. And this is a nice, we had a Syrian volunteer that was working, who then provided one of the recipes that our chefs then adapted to make sure that it fit within it was healthy and nutritious, which was then being resupplied back to the groups that were dealing with refugees and communities. So it was a lovely little sort of like circular story where you could see someone coming in, and it was great. And I think they made two recipes throughout this. It was really lovely. We were providing food to people who'd been discharged from hospital. We had that feedback, and also we had a nice little story of a particular family that the mother was going in. She had 2 young children, and the husband was disabled, and they were really concerned about making food. So we were able to supply meals to this family, and there was plenty of cases like that. But basically what we heard back is that the families were really grateful. We were providing food to single parents, to much larger families, and also to grandparents who, under COVID, in lockdown, they were probably they had grandchildren that they were taking care of, and they were having to feed 3 times a day. So these frozen meals were actually a godsend for some of these families. As I said, that we had a large number of volunteers across both boroughs. I would say on a regular, routinely over the whole project, probably rotation of over 30 volunteers. And some of these volunteers have then went on to actually get jobs on some of our other programs. So that was lovely, and also the friendship that was born. And we had volunteers who kept saying, please rota me in, I want to come back. They all, they were so keen to be working and doing something other than staying at home, actually. But they loved it. They loved it. I mean, this is just, I won't read this, but this is some of the quotes. But it was really nice to see that they saw this as a kind of a Friday takeaway evening meal for some of them. They're babies eating cottage pie. So we had lots and lots of these kind of quotes coming back from the service users. So next step, so obviously the funding ended in March, but actually public health, one of my colleagues in public health Greenwich was successful in getting a new round of funding from the GLA. And so in this particular funding, we are actually continuing with the cook and freeze, but we also are exploring an income generating element through the development of some food products which we hope to sell. But I must stress that this is really only a feasibility just to see if it can work. And so it's more about identifying and which products would be favorable, which ones might sell, and making sure that we fit in with all the food safety side of it, so that it is something that can be sold, but it's just a feasibility at this point. And we've, throughout this whole program, we have all, you know, when I'm saying the volunteers, but they have been involved in all our decisions in coming up with how we're running this project. So part of the success of this is that they've owned this project and have really taken, and it's been successful and it's ongoing, and we're delighted at how well it went. And that's it really.
Thank you, Livia. If you don't mind stopping sharing when you have a sec.
Yeah, okay. Has it stopped?
Not yet.
Oh, I can't get it to. Oh,
Thank
you.
Oh, sorry, I could have done it actually. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Not used to the power. So we've just got a few questions that have come in through the chat for the speakers. So Jade, I know you shared the tool that you use, or one of the tools you used around nutritional content, but we just had a question come in just asking for a little bit more about how you look at salt and sugar levels in particular, how you determine whether they're right, and if they can be tailored at all for different people, or if you recommend anything around that.
Yeah, they're really interesting questions, and I'd like to hear what other people say about them, because they're questions we're thinking about. So yeah, we've got the RDAs, of course, so we can make the meals a percentage of the daily RDA, but of course it's not that simple, because we have to understand what else people are eating during the rest of the week, and that's tricky. So we're doing our best to talk to people eating the food about what the rest of the diet is like. So we're chatting to them and interviewing them, and there's some nutrition training, people coming in. The guys in Belfast are keeping nutrition diaries, and they've got a little app so they can take photos. You know, they've got learning difficulties, so they're not very good at keeping written diaries. So they're taking a photo of everything they eat during the course of the week, and then they can come in, chat to someone and have a look at that and see where the gaps are. But I think it's not easy. And I think, yeah, I'd like to hear other people's ideas about how they're doing that, how they're taking into account what the weekly food looks like, not just what the meal looks like, which is relatively easy to get right.
Thanks, Jade. And a question just came in as you were speaking about whether you've got nutritionists, but this specifically says volunteer nutritionists involved in the project at all.
No, well, we've had academic nutritionists involved quite a bit. So, of course, we've got Coventry University. So to begin with, we posted off the recipes to Coventry University and their nutrition department to have a look, and they sent back the analysis and quite detailed recommendations. But as we've gone on, we've got the academics much more embedded and nearer the ground, because we've come to understand that the people providing the food, cooking the food, and actually the volunteers and the people eating the food are the people who most need to get better at doing that kind of research day to day on the ground. So now we have the academic nutritionists alongside the cooks, helping them to think about what they're going to do so that they can carry on to do it. You know, it's no good just analysing one recipe in a really sophisticated academic way. It's about changing an approach in the long term. So we do have academic nutritionists, but now we plant them as near to the ground as possible.
Yeah, that sounds really positive.
Simon, can I just come in on that one?
Sure.
We've done a lot of work looking at the nutritional side of it, and there is nutritional standards in the US and Australia. There just isn't in the UK, which we could all look to, and that's one of the things that's what led us into this research project we're going into with Oxford and Plymouth, is to get a set of standards that this is the thing. but you can only deliver what you can deliver. You can't regulate what people eat outside of your program, and that's all you can do. There's no other way around it. You have to say, this is what the standard is, and this is what we will achieve. But outside of that, if you want to go eating lots of sugar and salt, then I can't do anything about it. But it's about information. It's about trying to ramp that up so older people do understand how their bodies change and what they need differently. So I think it's a joint thing we have to do together.
Thanks, Peter. And while you're there, people have been asking about the research projects that you've been involved in. And I should know the answer to this, but is anything available publicly yet from any of the research that you've been involved in?
Yeah, and I tried to minimize my screen, but with screen sharing, I kept clicking on Olivia's one, and I couldn't get it down. But I will send you the project, and you can the published paper, and you can send it out. The new
Okay,
one
great.
is just starting, so it isn't
Sure.
available yet.
Thank you. Sorry, I've just lost.
I'm just picking up on Fahim. Is it Fahim's piece? He wrote quite a long piece on about councils. And in answer to that, Fahim, you're absolutely right. Quite a lot of councils discharge their duty. They don't see it as a duty. It's not a mandatory thing. And all we can all do together is collect as much information and keep feeding it up to sustain and people like that they can bang on the drum to raise this up for everybody to understand the importance of it. And that's what exactly we do all the time. This is why we share everything we've got. And you're right, they do just signpost. They see it as an easy way out. And there's not a lot of charities out there that can afford to do this and afford to deliver meals. So it's just a case of just keep trying and trying and trying and try and develop models that our models, like we have income generating models where we sell food to people who can afford to pay for it and then use the profits to fund those that can't. So that's another way we work on it.
Thanks, Peter. We've had a question come in about sort of, I think this is where particularly at the start of the pandemic, when sort of lunch clubs and other kind of meals provision switched to doing home delivery, that actually helped to identify some sort of hidden clients or customers who perhaps wouldn't make it to a lunch club or similar community meal for some reason. And I don't know if any of the speakers have heard about that happening at all in their projects. Disabled people were mentioned in particular by Emily, who posed the question, but it might be other groups as well, or other parts of your geographies that you cover.
Yep. Go on, Jake, you go first.
You go first, Peter, it's fine.
We certainly, when we did a hot meal service, there was a definite difference. The people we support with hot meals are very different from those that have cooked or ready meals, etc. So we have two different types. There's a group of people out there that through physical or mental illness cannot prepare, could not stand at a kitchen, even microwave a meal. And there's a whole raft of those people out there that are just slipping under the radar all the time. And we found definitely they're the ones for the hot meal service. And it may be just a short-term intervention. They may only just be out of hospital, etc. But they really can't. I mean, they might be chair-bound or bed-bound, and they're still living in our community. And these are the raft of other people that just don't get supported when it comes to ready meals or hot meals. So there's definitely a lot of people out there like that.
Yeah, and our projects, even though they were very well embedded in their communities during lockdown, when they were going to people's homes, were surprised at some of the things they found and an ongoing need, I think, that will continue beyond COVID. So, for example, adults with learning difficulties looking after quite a lot of children sometimes, and some of the children themselves had special needs who they just couldn't cook. They couldn't leave the children unattended to go out and buy food. You know, there were things came to light that hadn't previously been understood because of COVID. Quite helpful, actually, overall. I think this sort of increased level of understanding, both from the projects, but also from the volunteers who didn't know their own communities, didn't know what was going on around the corner. So, yeah, I think the community organisations have been really good at addressing need because they're so embedded and because they've had volunteers. And the other ongoing need, of course, is the chat and social care that came with the food. Really desperate need for that for some people.
Jay, just picking up on that point, we had to provide counselling to some of our volunteers when they first started with us because they were just stunned, and some of them, I mean, one lady, her sister worked in healthcare, so you thought she would have known, but she had no idea what was actually in her community. So it's huge out there. It really is a big problem.
Yeah, we had the same thing. People astonished at what was going on just around the corner. So I think maybe COVID will leave communities changed in that way because more people understand what the voluntary sector is doing and more people understand what's going on for their neighbours.
Thanks both. Livia, this is not just a question for you, but you mentioned your surplus food supply in particular. And the questions just come in about any difficulties you might have faced about ensuring healthiness of meals while relying on a predominantly surplus food sort of supply chain. Have you had any issues about being unable to meet meals because of that? You're just on mute, I'm afraid.
Yes, I mean, surplus, as everyone knows, it is difficult to make a balanced meal, but we're very lucky because one, we have chefs with experience who've been trained in healthy eating, and then actually we were making sure that the meals then that we could produce with mostly using surplus, and if we had to then buy some additional ingredients, we would get that in so that we would make sure that we were supplying a healthy balanced meal every single time, predominantly using surplus. So it does need a skill set behind it to be able to do that. But I would say that the difference between producing, say, surplus meals from surplus food is that every week it was very different, and so there's more variety going out to the communities, whereas when you're actually, you know, when we were in Lucian, which was more like, you know, we knew what we were doing, we had a set recipe, we'd make sure those ingredients were there. Although they were recipes that we'd, you know, people had said that is what we like, this is what we want, there can be a little bit of maybe people get tired of that because it's the same kind of the same food as well. So there's, you know, there's pros and cons, you know, and I would say making from surplus is definitely also takes up a lot more time as well because there's a lot more preparation to do, but you do need to have the right people on board who can make, you know, can do that, and you have to have creative chefs really, you know, and that's, so I think we were very lucky to have that all in place.
Great, thank you all very much. I just want to move us to a bit of participation. So I'm just going to share a link in the chat to a Mentimeter page, which is a separate web page that you'll need to go into. So if you go to menti.com and just use this code 57549793, and then you should see this question come up. What one piece of advice would you give to somebody running or developing or running meals provision, whether that's hot, cold, or meal kits type provision, or frozen, sorry, Olivia, as well. So if it would just be great to get people's just any thoughts that people, all attendees have on that question. I'll just give you a moment of silence just to think, and then people's responses should pop up on the screen.
Simon, could you just give us that code?
Sure, it's 57549793. And you might need to type menti.com directly into a browser to be able to see that, for you to be able to enter information. Yeah, okay. So someone's managed to do that. So making sure that you provide culturally appropriate meals as well as meeting dietary requirements, focusing on dignity again. And yeah, just this morning we were talking about the dignity principles developed by Nourish, which I can share in the chat in a moment. Building up those relationships with surplus food networks, local producers, Fair Share and others. I think it is. I think when wanting to make sure that any food supply, particularly surplus, is nutritious, important to have relationships with the people that are providing that food to be able to perhaps challenge when needed if the supplies aren't what is needed. Really understanding the community, understanding the diners, their circumstances, making sure there's feedback on meals and that's acted on. Where using pricing, make sure that's sensible, and thinking about how you can make them free without stigma for those who won't be able to pay. It'd be interesting to hear more about that as well. Working with sort of professionals and personal contacts in the community, linking in with environmental health officers around food safety and allergen. It can be a little bit intimidating. I think that person's implying sometimes to involve environmental health, but actually they're very supportive of a lot of work around the country and obviously know what they're doing. Making sure you're talking to those receiving meals. Yes, making sure that food is much more than just the meal, an opportunity to reduce loneliness, and where possible, preventing people having to eat alone all the time. Excellent. I think that's most of the things that have come through. So the next question. Here we are. The next question that you might need to refresh your screen, but the code is the same. What's one challenge that you're still facing in developing or running meals provision as we go forward? Obviously, the speakers and others have talked about funding and lack of understanding sometimes around needs in a community, but it would be really good as we take forward some joint work on this to understand what the challenges are right now, particularly in the pretty unique circumstances we find ourselves in. So we've got lack of suitable, affordable space, building space, creating volume at scale, sort of finding ongoing secure funding, appropriate space for kitchen and storage. I think, yeah, that's really good to have a bit of detail around what the space issues can be. Trying to source locally rather than say from cheaper but perhaps less sustainable or less economically beneficial sources. Knowing when and how to step back. I assume that's perhaps about when to actually stop providing meals to individuals or groups of people. And how to now, as we hopefully are transitioning back to more face-to-face contact, how we move away from delivery to households to events, and perhaps whether that's communal eating, I'm not sure, or asking people to come in and collect meals as well. I know some projects are now trying to transition to that, so having a central collection point or central collections point. Trying to persuade others that it's about more than just food. Moving from free provision to a donation based provision, so I guess that's sort of pay as you feel type models. Actually, an issue currently being heard is that there's actually a lack of supply from some of the surplus providers. Still being able to offer choice and preferences and giving people a say over that is still a challenge someone's noting. And yeah, really important comment here about the level of unmet need, for example, in relation to mental health support needs. So a whole range of challenges there that I think I've heard before. Nothing surprising in one sense, but I think very helpful to check in and see what they are currently. So I'm going to stop sharing now and just ask our speakers, the three speakers, just if there's anything either in response to those comments that people have made, or anything that you wanted to say but haven't had a chance to say, or any other thoughts you have, any final tips or advice, or anything else you'd like to say to the group. So Jade, if I could come to you first, is there anything else you'd add?
There is one thing I should have said at the beginning, which is that we're funded by the National Lottery, the Community Fund, which I should have said.
Thanks. It is a common thread, actually, I think, through all the projects, including Food Power, that there is lottery support for some of our work. So obviously a very important funder, particularly at the moment. Peter, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, just one last thing is that COVID has ripped open the fabric of our society, and it's laid bare all of its inadequacies. But it's never been a better time now to shout about this project, about feeding people. And we have noted in COVID, those that shout the loudest tend to get noticed. So with the school meals, etc. So everybody, if you've got any information, if you've got any insights, share it with Sustain, because the more we shout about it, the more people will listen, and the more hope and help there'll be going forward.
Thanks, Peter. That's excellent call to action. And Livia?
Well, I mean, I suppose from the practical point of view, what comes to mind, one of the things that can be quite challenging is the logistics. It's making sure that groups can pick up, because usually these groups are working with volunteers as well. So there's a lot of reliance on volunteers, managing and running the whole thing really, and that can be one of the downsides of the project if you can't have, if you can't be delivering directly to the families, if you're expecting the projects to come and pick up, which makes it more effective, more efficient, but it's relying on their ability to do that, and that can make it difficult. So logistics is always a problem in these projects.
Thank you.
I mean, there's probably a lot. Yeah.
Sorry, did I cut you off?
No, that's fine.
Okay, great. So thanks very much, everybody. And as part of follow on from my Churchill Fellowship, where I travelled to those 3 countries, I am going to be doing a project looking particularly at the issue of discharge at hospital, discharge from hospital, and people's access to food and meals at that point. So it's obviously come up in people's presentations, some of the comments. So that's something I will be sharing soon. There's nothing on the website quite yet, but it is a bit of work that we'll be starting over the summer for a 6-month period to try and, as Peter says, try and gather as much evidence as we can and try and have to create great awareness, but really increased action around that particular issue of discharge. And we hope it will also pick up some of the other issues that we know are wider around meals provision. I've just shared the link again that Ren shared earlier to go to the Wander Space. That is our attempt during the festival to create a bit of that networking space outside of these Zoom sessions. It's a slightly unusual space to be in, but basically you'll go to it, and if you've not been before, you'll be asked to create an avatar, so you can take a photo of yourself, or you can just pick an icon, and then you get put into this space, and you're a circle yourself, and then you have to move your circle towards other people, and then you'll join a bigger circle together and you can have a conversation. So it is a bit like walking to the coffee break room, having your coffee and seeing someone that you'd quite like to talk to, or maybe you don't know who they are, and you just go move your circle over to them and you have a conversation. I've shared the link to that Wander Space and a video that explains it much better than I can about how to use it. I'll be there now after this session, and Emily O'Brien, who's been kindly taking notes for this session, who's from Brighton and Hove Food Partnership and one of our Food Power peer mentors, will also be there as well. So if people do want to chat about this session or anything else, just follow that the first Wander link, and we'll see you there. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to our speakers and all those who've helped with the session. There's lots more sessions obviously happening over the next 2 days, and we are sending the links to all the day's sessions in the morning every day so that they don't get lost. But any issues, just email foodpoverty@sustainweb.org and one of us will get back to you. So thanks very much, everybody, and see you in the Wander Space or at another session. Bye.